The storm came like a living thing that night, wild, howling, and cruel. Miles from town, Jack Turner, a war veteran who'd lost more than he could ever say, was driving home through the blizzard when something caught his headlights. A faint glint of metal, a cage half buried in ice. Inside, a German shepherd, bleeding, trembling, eyes begging for help no words could speak. Jack didn't know it then, but this single act of mercy would lead him into a world of darkness and redemption, uncovering a secret no soldier could ever prepare for. Because sometimes, the ones we save are the ones sent to save us. Cedar Ridge, Colorado, was the kind of mountain town that winter never really left. When the snow came, it came to stay. Layer after layer, until even the rooftops forgot what color they were. The streets emptied early. Smoke drifted from chimneys like tired sighs, and the silence after sunset could make a man feel like the last heartbeat in the world. That night, the storm arrived with a vengeance. Wind howled down the timber slopes, bending the pines like supplicants, while snow hammered against anything foolish enough to stand still. On Timberline Road, the only light came from a pair of headlights carving a narrow path through white chaos. Behind the wheel was Jack Turner, a man who'd seen worse storms, but never this kind of loneliness. Jack was 40, broad-shouldered, and built the way old barns were, meant to last, even when weathered. His jaw was square and rough with stubble, his nose slightly crooked from a long-heeled break. The gray in his hair wasn't from age so much as the kind of fatigue only war could leave behind. Years as a Marine in Afghanistan had carved stillness into his movements and caution into his eyes. He'd come home to Cedar Ridge 3 winters ago, hoping to trade gunfire for quiet, dust for snow. But quiet has its own kind of noise, and tonight it was deafening. He drove a beat-up Ford F-250 that growled more than it purred, heater blasting, windshield wipers fighting a losing war. He'd just left town after dropping off supplies for a neighbor. The clerk at Meeker's grocery, Dottie, had begged him not to drive. She was the kind who baked pies for every holiday and worried about everyone's soul. Jack had smiled, just enough to ease her mind, and promised he'd be careful. He always was. The storm thickened, and the world shrank to 2 cones of light ahead of the truck. Then something glinted, faint and wrong, on the edge of the road. Instinct made him ease off the gas. The Ford slid a few feet before the chains caught. Jack squinted through the snow, caught the glimmer again, low, metallic, half buried in ice. He pulled over, killed the engine, and stepped into the storm. The cold bit his skin instantly, stealing his breath. Snow clawed at his coat as he trudged toward the ditch, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. What he found made his stomach twist. A steel cage half swallowed by snow. Not a crate for pets. Too heavy. Too deliberate. Rust had eaten its edges, and the door was wired shut with a coat hanger, twisted so tight it had cut into the metal. Inside, barely moving, lay a German shepherd. Its fur was black and tan, matted with blood and ice, one paw grotesquely swollen. Frost clung to its whiskers like white lace. Jack crouched, voice low, steady. "Easy. I'm not your problem, buddy. I'm here to help." The dog's eyes opened, amber and haunted, the eyes of something that had seen too much. Not panic, but calculation. A soldier's eyes, he thought. He pulled out his Leatherman, working the frozen wire loose, every twist echoing through the metal. The shepherd flinched but didn't attack, just watched his hands with quiet endurance. Finally, the latch gave. The door creaked open, and Jack waited, letting the animal decide. The dog sniffed the air, then dragged itself forward, trembling, until its head brushed the open space. Jack slid off his coat and pushed it inside. "Here, smell that. Warmth, not danger." The shepherd pressed its muzzle into the fabric, then looked up at him once more, as if granting permission. When he lifted the dog, the weight startled him. It was far too light for its frame. Bones, sinew, and pain. He carried it to the truck, shielding it from the wind, and laid it gently on the seat, wrapping the coat around its ribs. The animal didn't resist. Its breathing came shallow and ragged, but when the heater started to hum, its shivers began to ease. Jack studied the creature in the dashboard's dim glow. There was a faint tattoo inside one ear, frosted but visible. He'd seen those markings before. Military, police, service units. Someone had trained this dog, then left it here to die. He felt anger coil low in his gut, the kind that didn't burn hot but cold, clean and focused. He thought briefly about driving to the 24-hour vet clinic, but 10 miles of icy road with a dying animal in the dark didn't sit right. His cabin was 5 minutes away. He knew how to stop bleeding, how to fight shock. He'd done it under worse skies. "Home first," he muttered, shifting into gear. The drive up the mountain lane was slow and punishing. The truck's tires chewed through snowdrifts, while the shepherd lay still beside him, chest rising in fragile rhythm. Once, the dog opened its eyes, staring at him with quiet intelligence. Jack nodded, eyes on the road. "Hang on, soldier. Almost there." At last, the glow of his porch light appeared through the white curtain. He parked, scooped the shepherd back into his arms, and carried it inside. The cabin was small, wood walls, stone fireplace, tools neatly hung like obedient soldiers. But it was warm, and it smelled of cedar and old leather. He laid the dog on a thick quilt near the fire, then went to work like muscle memory. He cleaned the wounds with saline, used antiseptic spray from his med kit, and wrapped the swollen paw with gauze and vet tape. The dog trembled under his hands but made no sound, only flicked its eyes toward him between shallow breaths. When Jack finished, he sat back, studying the animal in full. Male, maybe 4 years old, strong bone structure, good hips, pure working stock. There was intelligence in the set of its ears, discipline in the stillness of its body even while in pain. This dog had known commands, had known purpose. Jack stirred a bit of broth on the stove and set the bowl near the shepherd. It sniffed, then lapped slowly, exhaustion giving way to faint hunger. When it was done, it rested its muzzle on the quilt and exhaled a sound that was neither growl nor sigh, just release. He smiled, faint but real. "You made it, pal." The fire cracked softly. Shadows from the flames played across the cabin walls, warm light in a cold world. Jack eased down onto an old sleeping bag a few feet away, boots off but still in his clothes. He faced the dog, watching its chest rise and fall. "You've got a chip," he murmured. "We'll check it tomorrow, see who forgot what loyalty means." The shepherd stirred, opening one eye. Jack took it as acknowledgement. He fed another log into the fire, dimmed the lantern, and let silence settle around them. The wind rattled the eaves, and snow slapped the windows. But inside there was peace. Fragile, temporary, but real. For a long time, Jack stayed awake, listening to the breathing of the dog and the storm beyond the walls. He thought about the countless times he'd carried wounded men through chaos, the feeling of weight that wasn't just body but trust. Tonight, that feeling had returned, but lighter, purer. He whispered into the half-dark, "You're safe now. That's the only order tonight." The dog's tail thumped once against the quilt, barely audible, but enough. Outside, the storm buried the old cage until only the faintest shape remained under the snow. By morning, no one passing would know what had happened here. But inside the cabin, by the glow of a stubborn fire, A man who had lost faith and a dog who had lost everything else had found each other. Two survivors breathing the same promise into the storm. Tomorrow would not end in a cage. Morning broke slowly over Cedar Ridge, the light dull and reluctant, as if even the sun doubted the wisdom of rising. Snow still pressed heavy against the cabin windows, and the wind had softened into a tired whisper, weaving through the pine eaves. Inside, the fire had burned low, leaving a deep amber glow that painted warmth across the wooden walls. Jack Turner woke to the familiar ache in his shoulders, the kind that came from years of sleeping light and ready. For a moment, he forgot there was another presence in the room. Then the soft sound of breathing, steady, rhythmic, reminded him he wasn't alone anymore. The German shepherd lay curled near the hearth, wrapped in his old coat like a soldier in field blankets. The swelling in the paw had gone down slightly. The bandage held, though Jack would have to re-wrap it before noon. When he moved, the dog's eyes opened, clearer now, alert but calm. He watched Jack as though measuring the man all over again, quietly deciding if last night's mercy was real. "Morning, soldier," Jack murmured, crouching by the quilt. "You made it." The shepherd blinked, then gave a low, weary sigh that sounded almost human. Jack stirred up the coals, poured water into the kettle, and leaned his elbows on the counter while the fire came back to life. He caught his reflection in the frost-misted window. Gray eyes, unshaven jaw, and the faint tremor in his left hand he tried not to notice. The hand had never fully healed after a blast in Helmand Province, and when the cold settled in, the fingers stiffened like old hinges. He flexed them slowly, then turned toward the dog again. "Guess we both have old injuries?" He placed a shallow bowl of broth on the floor, watched the shepherd limp forward to drink, careful not to put weight on the injured paw. There was a quiet dignity in the way the dog moved, obedient to pain but not conquered by it. Jack found himself smiling, something rare enough these days that it surprised him. "You've got fight left," he said softly. "That's something." After breakfast, coffee for him, water and leftover broth for the dog, Jack pulled on his parka and grabbed his keys. The storm had calmed, but snow still lay waist-deep in the yard. He opened the cabin door, and the cold rushed in, clean and sharp. The shepherd's ears perked, and for the first time, Jack heard the faint thump of a tail. "Not yet, buddy. We're heading to town. Need to get you looked at." He lifted the dog gently into the truck, laid down an old blanket, and turned the heater on full blast. The road was carved from the night's drift, glistening in the thin morning sun. The world felt new, like everything had been scrubbed clean. But Jack knew better. Snow only buried things. It didn't erase them. The drive into Cedar Ridge took 40 minutes on slow tires. The town was waking up. Smoke from the diner's chimney, a snowplow crawling past the post office, and the flag outside the sheriff's office snapping stiffly in the wind. Jack parked in front of Henson's veterinary clinic, a squat brick building painted the color of faded sage, with a wooden sign that read, "Caring hands for every creature." He carried the shepherd inside, careful of the paw. The bell above the door chimed, and the smell of antiseptic and cedar polish greeted him. Behind the counter stood Dr. Michael Henson, a man in his early 50s with graying hair cropped close to his head and a face that looked carved from the same stubborn mountain stone as the town itself. He'd served 2 tours as a field medic before turning to veterinary medicine, a man who'd learned to fix what he could, whether it barked or bled. His beard was trimmed but rough, and his voice carried the calm patience of someone who had seen chaos and survived it. "Morning, Jack," Henson said, pulling off a pair of gloves. "What have you got there?" "Found him last night," Jack replied. "Cage half buried in ice. Paws torn up, malnourished, but he's got training. Looks like a working shepherd. Henson's expression tightened. Let's get him on the table. The exam room was small but spotless. Henson ran his hands gently over the dog's ribs, checking for fractures, murmuring in the quiet rhythm of habit. He's been through hell, he said. Cuts are clean. Wire or chain, maybe both. Whoever left him knew he wouldn't last the night. Jack clenched his jaw. Then they meant for him not to. Henson gave a small nod, then picked up the scanner from the counter. Let's see if he's chipped. The device beeped faintly as it passed over the dog's neck, then paused. The screen flashed, a microchip number, but half the digits were scrambled symbols instead of code. Henson frowned. That's not standard. Encryption layer, military or federal issue. Meaning? Jack asked. Meaning whoever owned this dog doesn't want him identified. He leaned closer. Jack, this isn't a house pet. I'd bet money he's a retired or repurposed K9. Maybe police, maybe private contractor. Either way, someone wiped the registration. Jack looked at the shepherd, who lay still but watchful, one ear twitching at every word. They abandoned him, he said quietly. Henson sighed. Or someone wanted him gone. Seen this before. Trauma dogs, overtrained or injured, too expensive to rehabilitate. Easier to make them disappear. Silence filled the room. Outside, the wind rattled the frosted windows like restless fingers. Jack brushed his thumb along the shepherd's neck, feeling the faint pulse under fur. I'm calling him Shadow, he said. Seems right. Henson smiled faintly. Good name. He's lucky you found him. Maybe it's the other way around. Henson gave him a look that wasn't unkind. You still dreaming about the bridge? Jack's shoulders stiffened. The bridge. The last patrol. Ranger. His old K9. Partner. Caught in crossfire. A flash of fire, and then silence. He hadn't said the name aloud in years. Not lately, he lied. Sure, Henson said softly, turning back to the computer. Keep an eye on the wound. I'll send antibiotics, but watch for infection. And Jack... He hesitated. If that chip's really coded, don't dig too deep. Sometimes it's better not to wake what's buried. Jack nodded but said nothing. He paid, thanked him, and carried Shadow back to the truck. The dog's head rested against his chest the whole way, heartbeat syncing with his own in a quiet rhythm of trust neither had planned for. The sun was slipping west when they reached home. Jack built the fire higher, set out food, and unwrapped Shadow's paw for cleaning. As he worked, his mind drifted, back to sand, to radio chatter, to the day Ranger didn't come back. The grief had calcified over time, turning into something like silence. But now, looking into Shadow's eyes, he felt that silence cracking open. Later, as night folded over the mountains, Jack sat by the fire, mug of coffee cooling in his hands. Shadow lay stretched beside him, the slow rise and fall of his chest the only sound. Snow began again outside, gentle this time. The room glowed gold, and the weight that had lived in Jack's chest for years felt, for the first time, a little lighter. He whispered without thinking. You came back, didn't you, Ranger? Different body, same soul. Shadow stirred, opened his eyes, and looked at him with an almost knowing calm. Jack reached out, brushed his hand through the dog's coarse fur, and smiled faintly. Maybe that's how faith works. God doesn't give you what you lost. He gives you what you need to keep going. The fire crackled. Outside, the world slept under white silence. Inside, 2 survivors, 1 man, 1 dog, began to heal. 3 days passed since the storm had broken, but the snow in Cedar Ridge didn't melt. It settled in like an unwelcome guest. The mountains wore their white silence heavily, and Jack Turner's cabin stood half-buried against the slope, smoke rising from the chimney in slow, lazy ribbons. Inside, life had fallen into a rhythm. Feed the fire, change the bandages, watch the world through the window while Shadow learned to walk again. The shepherd's recovery was remarkable. The swelling had eased, the limp lessened, and the hollow look in his eyes had softened into something almost peaceful. Jack had grown used to the quiet companionship, the way Shadow followed him from room to room, the soft thump of a tail whenever he spoke. It had been years since he'd allowed another heartbeat to sync with his own. Maybe too many. Still, something about the dog's calm focus unsettled him. Shadow didn't bark at snow hares or chase the wind. He listened, always listening. That morning the sky hung the color of pewter. Jack had just finished chopping wood when Shadow stiffened by the door, ears pricking toward the road. Before Jack heard anything, the dog was already growling low in his throat. Jack straightened, axe in hand. A pair of headlights crawled through the fog, rare this high up the ridge. The truck that stopped in front of his cabin wasn't one he recognized. It was a black Ford Expedition, clean despite the mud roads, tinted windows, no front plate. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off. Two men stepped out. The first was tall and lean, late 30s, wearing a gray pea coat buttoned to the neck. His hair was dark, trimmed military short, and his jaw was so sharp it could have been drawn with a ruler. When he took off his leather gloves, Jack noticed the faint burn scars on his right hand, the kind that come from munitions or engines, not accidents. His movements were deliberate, economical, like a man used to being obeyed. The second man was shorter, heavy-set, maybe mid-40s, with a trimmed beard going salt and pepper, and eyes that didn't quite settle anywhere for long. His parka looked new, too clean for mountain work. He carried a clipboard under one arm, which already set off Jack's suspicion. The tall one smiled as he approached, though his eyes didn't. "Morning. Sorry to bother you this far out. We're looking for a dog, German Shepherd, male, about 5 years old. Escaped during the storm." His voice was smooth, calm, the kind people use when they've rehearsed what to say. Jack leaned against the porch post, keeping his face neutral. "Plenty of dogs run loose up here. What makes you think he's mine?" The shorter man stepped forward, pulling a printed sheet from the clipboard. A photo of a shepherd, black and tan, mid-stride. The resemblance was uncanny. "This one, his name's Rex, belongs to a training company based in Denver. We've been contracted to retrieve him." Behind Jack, Shadow growled, deep, guttural, unlike anything he'd heard from the dog before. The sound made both men flinch. The shepherd stood just inside the doorway, hackles bristling, teeth bared, eyes fixed on the strangers. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Jack didn't move. "He doesn't seem to think you're friends." The tall man chuckled, but the edge of irritation showed in the corners of his mouth. "Storms make animals act strange. You know how it is." He reached into his coat, pulling out a wallet with a plastic ID sleeve. Jack caught a flash of a badge, but the laminate was cloudy, the logo generic, and the name read, Department of Animal Recovery. No state seal, no agency mark. Jack's years in the Marines had taught him to read more from what people didn't say. He noticed the small details, the spotless boots despite the snow, the way the man's eyes kept scanning the tree line, and how the other's hand never left his coat pocket. These weren't rescuers. "Appreciate the visit," Jack said evenly. "But this dog's under veterinary care. If you've got real paperwork, bring it by the sheriff's office. They'll sort it out." The shorter man opened his mouth, but the tall one raised a hand to stop him. "No need to get official. We'll be back with the proper forms." His smile thinned. "You have yourself a good day, sir." They turned, walking back to the SUV. Snow crunched under their boots, and Jack watched as the truck rolled down the drive, taillights fading into the white haze. Only when they vanished did Shadow's growl fade into a low whine. Jack knelt beside him, resting a hand on the dog's head. "You knew them, didn't you?" The shepherd's breathing quickened. His gaze flicked to the window, then back to Jack. Fear mixed with defiance. That look said everything. Inside Jack's chest, the old instincts kicked in, the kind honed by years of patrols, when danger didn't come with a warning shot, but with silence. He moved to the corner where the old cage sat, half folded from when he'd brought it in as evidence. Something metallic caught his eye. Beneath a scrap of frozen straw was a thin, triangular piece of metal. He pried it loose, brushed away the grime, and revealed an engraving. A triangle inside a circle, stamped with the faint letters VRC. He didn't know what it meant, but it stirred something in the back of his mind. He carried it to the workbench and set it under the lamp. The edges were machine-cut, precision-made, not scrap. The design reminded him of old contractor insignias he'd seen overseas, logos used by private security firms who trained K-9 units for high-risk work. He'd heard rumors before, companies taking retired service dogs, repurposing them for underground buyers, fight circuits, or black market breeding programs. Most of those stories were too ugly to repeat. Shadow lay by the fire now, still tense, eyes tracking the door. Jack crouched, beside him again. "Whoever they are," he said softly, "they're not done looking." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. Every sound outside, the shift of ice on the roof, the creak of wood in the cold, sounded like footsteps. He checked the locks twice, then again. Old habits came back uninvited, mapping exits, watching windows, calculating fields of view. At some point he realized Shadow was awake too, lying with his head up, ears turned towards the window. They were both listening to the same ghosts. When dawn finally came, it was a dull gray, the kind that made everything look like a memory. Jack brewed coffee and sat at the table with the metal tag beside him. The triangular mark gleamed faintly under the light. He reached for the phone, thought about calling Henson, then hesitated. The vet's warning echoed in his mind. Don't dig too deep. But the truth had a way of finding soldiers like him. He could feel it already, the pull toward something dangerous, something that wouldn't let go. He looked down at Shadow, whose gaze never wavered. "You and I," Jack said quietly, "we're not just survivors. We're witnesses." The shepherd lifted his head, the morning light glinting in his amber eyes. Outside, the wind stirred the snow, whispering across the frozen yard like the promise of more trouble on its way. The snow had stopped falling, but Cedar Ridge remained trapped in winter's quiet hold. The forest surrounding Jack Turner's cabin stood ghostly under the pale morning sun, branches heavy with white, every sound muffled as if the world were holding its breath. Jack stood on his porch, coffee steaming in one hand, the small triangular metal tag glinting in the other. The letters VRC caught the light again. They hadn't stopped haunting him since the night he found them. Shadow lay near the steps, eyes sharp despite the calm. When Jack had brought the piece of metal closer, the shepherd's nose twitched, tail stiffening. He kept glancing toward the tree line, as though the woods were whispering a secret he understood, and Jack didn't. "All right," Jack muttered, setting the cup aside. "Show me." The shepherd rose immediately, limping only slightly now, and trotted toward the trail behind the cabin. Jack slung his rifle over his shoulder. Not because he expected trouble, but because the world had taught him that expecting it was the surest way to stay alive. He zipped his parka, locked the cabin door, and followed. The forest smelled of cold pine and old secrets. Snow crunched under his boots as Shadow led him deeper along a narrow path winding through aspens and spruce. The dog's gait was confident, nose low, tail straight. A hunter's posture. They walked for nearly half an hour before Shadow stopped abruptly near a grove of frost-laced birch trees. Ahead, partly hidden by drifts, was a shape that didn't belong to nature. A structure, small, square, and made of corrugated metal, sat half-collapsed among the trees. An old storage shed, maybe 10 by 10 feet, its roof sagging under years of snow. A rusted padlock hung broken from the door. Jack crouched, scanning the ground. Tire tracks ran parallel to the shed, wide enough for heavy trucks, now half frozen but still visible. He brushed away the snow and found impressions. Boot prints, maybe 3 or 4 sets, all recent. Shadow sniffed near the corner of the shed and let out a low whine. Jack followed, noticing a faint chemical smell, the kind that clung to memory from his military years. Ketamine, or something close, a sedative. The scent lingered like guilt in the air. "Easy," he whispered to the dog. "We'll take a look." He pushed open the shed door, hinges groaning. Inside, dust and cold air swirled, revealing a scene frozen in time. A steel table stood near the back, stained dark in places that hadn't been cleaned properly. Beside it lay 2 empty tranquilizer dart cases, an overturned plastic crate, and a length of heavy chain bolted to the wall. In the far corner, a trail camera was mounted high under a rafter, its lens cracked but intact. Jack stepped closer, boots echoing. The smell grew stronger, an antiseptic tang mixed with something animal. He picked up a dart case, turning it over. "Custom," he murmured. The cartridges were marked with serials, not standard issue. Whoever used this place knew what they were doing. He found a small piece of torn fabric caught on the chain, a strip of blue nylon webbing, the kind used on tactical harnesses for service dogs. Shadow sniffed it, then looked up at Jack, ears twitching, a quiet recognition in his eyes. Jack bagged the sample in a small Ziploc from his coat pocket. Years of field training came back naturally. Collect, record, don't contaminate. He also pocketed the cracked memory card from the trail camera. "We'll see what you've been watching," he muttered. Outside, the forest seemed to press closer, branches whispering above them. Jack felt that familiar twinge of paranoia. Not the fear of being watched, but the certainty of it. He glanced around one last time before heading back. On the way out, he stopped by a cluster of tracks leading away from the shed. The tread pattern matched heavy off-road tires, deep grooves, twin ridges. The same pattern he'd noticed on the black expedition that had come to his cabin days earlier. He knelt, brushing snow aside, his breath misting. "You've been here," he whispered. Back home, the fire was still faintly warm. Jack set the evidence on the table. The trail cam, the nylon strap, the dart shell, the metal tag. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes never leaving the items. Jack turned on his old laptop, one of those indestructible field models built for dust and heat. He popped in the memory card, waited for the flicker of life on the screen. The files loaded slowly, mostly static and corrupted timestamps. But one video played, grainy footage, shot at night, a white blur of snow, faint headlights moving through trees. Then figures, 3 men in parkas, dragging something large between them. A cage. Inside it, a dog thrashing weakly. Jack froze the frame and zoomed in. The shepherd's markings were faint but familiar. Shadow. His hand tightened on the mouse. The timestamp read 2 nights before the storm. Whoever those men were, they'd brought the cage here, then abandoned it when the blizzard hit. He exhaled, long and controlled. So that's where you came from. Jack reached for the phone and dialed the clinic. Dr. Michael Henson answered after 2 rings, his voice tired but steady. Cedar Ridge Vet. It's Jack. I found something out here. Old shed off Timberline Ridge. I'm sending you photos and samples. Same area as before? Henson asked. Yeah, and it reeks of ketamine. Might be bigger than we thought. There was silence, then the sound of Henson exhaling through his nose. Send it over. I'll run the tests myself. And Jack. Yeah? Be careful. If they're using tranquilizers in the woods, they're not amateurs. Jack nodded, though the vet couldn't see him. Copy that. That evening, he packaged the samples, sealed them tight, and drove them down to town. The roads were slick, but Shadow sat, upright in the passenger seat, watching every passing light like it meant something. Jack parked behind the clinic, handed the package to Henson personally. The vet looked as worn as ever, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses perched low on his nose, wearing a flannel shirt under his white coat. You sure about this? He asked. Not sure of anything, Jack replied. But I can't ignore it. Henson sighed, taking the samples. Give me a day. If I find anything illegal in these compounds, I'll call you first. Jack returned to the cabin past midnight. The forest loomed darker now, no wind, just the faint creak of branches heavy with snow. Inside, he poured himself a glass of bourbon, sat by the fire, and watched Shadow sleep. The dog's breathing was even, deep, the kind of peace earned only by exhaustion. His phone buzzed the next evening. It was Henson. I've got results. You were right. What did you find? Ketamine and phenobarbital, mixed with a stabilizer we use for large animals. Someone's using tranquilizer-grade drugs meant for wildlife control, but the concentration's wrong. Too high. It's meant to immobilize, not sedate. Jack's grip tightened around the phone. Dog trade? Maybe, or something worse. These compounds don't come cheap or legal. I ran the metal tag, too. VRC belongs to a defunct private security contractor out of Nevada, folded 5 years ago. But their assets? Nobody knows what happened to them. Jack looked toward Shadow, lying by the window, snowlight glinting off his fur. Guess we just found one. He hung up slowly, the weight of the truth settling on him. Out there, beneath the frozen calm of Cedar Ridge, men were capturing, drugging, and selling trained dogs like weapons. The same kind he'd once fought beside. Shadow lifted his head, meeting Jack's eyes. Yeah, Jack whispered. We're going to find them. The fire hissed, and the snow outside began to fall again. Soft, patient, relentless, as if trying to bury every sin this quiet town kept hidden. The storm returned just as the sun went down, sweeping across Cedar Ridge like a ghost come back for unfinished business. Snow whipped sideways through the trees, turning the world into a blur of white and shadow. Inside Jack Turner's cabin, the fire burned bright but restless, casting long, flickering lines across the walls. On the table sat a map, an old compass, a half-empty thermos of coffee, and a plan. Dr. Michael Henson's call from the night before still echoed in Jack's mind. They're not amateurs, and they're still out there. He knew the trail through the woods wasn't abandoned. It was only waiting for darkness. He wasn't going alone. By 8 that evening, 2 trucks rolled up outside his cabin, tires crunching over the frozen ground. The first man to step out was Tom Avery, 42, tall and broad, with close-cropped blonde hair and a beard peppered gray. Tom had served with Jack overseas, once a medic who now ran a small repair shop in town. His right arm bore a long scar from shrapnel, a souvenir of the day Jack had dragged him from a burning Humvee. Since then, loyalty between them wasn't spoken. It was understood. "Still know how to pick bad weather for a fight," Tom said, stamping snow from his boots as he entered. Jack cracked a faint smile. "Storms keep cowards home." From the second truck came Cal Ramirez, the youngest of the group, barely 30, lean with deep brown skin and dark eyes that rarely blinked. A former explosives specialist, Cal carried the quiet patience of someone who had seen too many things blow apart. He removed his wool cap, revealing short black hair dusted with snow. "You sure about this, Jack?" he asked softly. "We bring the sheriff. It's paperwork. We go alone. It's war." Jack looked up from the map. "War's the one thing we understand, and those dogs don't have time for paperwork." The three men studied the layout by lantern light. The old shed Jack had found was just the edge of something larger, a warehouse complex hidden deeper in the forest, where tire tracks and drone footage from Henson's friend had shown unusual nighttime movement. Jack pointed to the coordinates. "We enter from the south ridge, follow the creek bed. Wind will cover our noise. Cal, you handle locks. Tom, you watch the east wall. We get in, get them out, no heroics." Tom chuckled. "Since when have you ever listened to that rule?" Shadow sat quietly near the door, wearing the dark green harness Jack had repaired that afternoon. His wound had healed enough for light movement. As Jack loaded his rifle, the shepherd rose and padded over, pressing his muzzle against Jack's hand. The message was clear. "I'm coming too." "Fine," Jack said, patting the dog's head. "But stay close." By 10, the blizzard was in full roar. They moved through the woods under cover of white, flashlights dimmed, following the creek's frozen edge. The wind howled through pines like distant artillery, drowning their footsteps. Shadow led the way, his nose cutting through the storm as if guided by memory. After nearly an hour, Cal raised a gloved hand. Ahead, a faint orange glow broke the darkness. Floodlights half buried in snow, surrounding a squat concrete building. The warehouse. 3 trucks sat parked out front, engines idling, steam rising from their hoods. Men moved in and out, silhouettes against the light. Tom whispered, "That's more than I expected." Jack nodded. 5 or 6, maybe more inside. We don't wait. Cal, kill the power." Cal crept toward the rear panel, his small frame nearly invisible in the storm. Within seconds, the lights flickered and died, plunging the clearing into darkness. Shouts echoed inside the building. Jack and Tom moved fast, crossing the yard while Shadow stayed low beside them, silent as breath. At the main door, the lock gave way to Cal's crowbar. They slipped in through the shadows. The smell hit them first, blood, ammonia, and wet fur. Rows of cages lined the walls, each holding a dog in some stage of terror. German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labradors, all trembling, their ribs sharp, their eyes hollow. Some whimpered, others barked weakly at the sudden dark. Tom's voice caught. "Jesus, Jack!" Jack gritted his teeth. "We're getting them out." He began snapping open cage latches while Cal cut the chain from a line of pens. The dogs, hesitant at first, edged forward, tails low. Shadow moved among them, nuzzling each gently, coaxing them toward freedom. His calm seemed to reassure them more than words ever could. Then came the noise, a door slamming somewhere deeper inside. A beam of flashlight swept across the room. "Who the hell's in here?" a voice barked. Jack froze. The beam swung closer, revealing a man in a black tactical vest, tall, built heavy in the shoulders, a pistol drawn. His face was half covered by a wool mask, but his stance screamed training. Not a random poacher, but security. Before Jack could speak, the man lunged forward. A second figure appeared from the opposite doorway, knife flashing under the light. Jack turned, raising his rifle butt just as the attacker closed the distance. The knife arced toward his chest. And then Shadow moved. The shepherd launched from the darkness like a bullet, colliding with the man mid-swing. The knife went clattering across the concrete. Shadow's teeth sank into the attacker's arm as the man screamed, falling backward into a cage. Jack swung his rifle and struck the second assailant in the ribs, sending him sprawling. Tom grabbed a fallen chain and wrapped it around his hands like brass knuckles, while Cal covered the rear. "Move!" Jack shouted. "Get them out!" The first man tore free, blood streaking his sleeve. He reached for his holster, too slow. Shadow hit him again, driving him against the wall. Jack fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "You move again, you... don't get another chance." For a moment, the warehouse filled with chaos, barking, shouting, the sound of cages breaking open. Cal herded the freed dogs toward the door, while Tom secured the unconscious guard with rope. When it was over, the only sounds left were panting breaths and the low whimper of animals tasting freedom for the first time in months. Jack knelt beside Shadow, whose left shoulder was slick with blood. A knife graze, shallow but painful. The shepherd looked up, eyes steady, tail wagging faintly as if to say it was nothing. "You stupid brave thing," Jack whispered, tearing a strip from his sleeve to bandage the wound. "You saved my damn life." Outside, the wind screamed around the warehouse like applause. The men moved the rescued dogs into the trucks, wrapping them in blankets. One by one, they disappeared into the storm, ghosts slipping away before dawn. Back at the cabin hours later, Jack sat on the floor beside the fire, Shadow's head resting on his knee. The shepherd was drowsy from the painkillers Henson had given earlier over the radio. The firelight flickered over both of them, man and dog, bound by something deeper than loyalty. Tom stood in the doorway, a tired smile breaking through his beard. "You realize you've just started a war, right?" Jack stroked Shadow's fur gently. "Then we finish it right." He bent forward, pressing his forehead to the dog's. For the first time in years, Jack Turner prayed, not for safety but for purpose. Outside, the storm began to fade. And somewhere under that endless sky, the sound of chains breaking still echoed in the dark. The storm had passed, leaving Cedar Ridge wrapped in a silence that felt like prayer. Sunlight spilled through the mountains for the first time in weeks, catching on the crusted snow and breaking it into thousands of tiny mirrors. The pines no longer groaned under the wind. They stood still, regal and patient, as if watching over the town below. At Jack Turner's cabin, smoke curled gently from the chimney, not out of habit but celebration. Inside, the warmth smelled of cedar, coffee, and hope. The floor was scattered with blankets and makeshift bedding, not for people, but for dogs. All 41 of them, rescued from the warehouse, now safe. Some slept soundly by the fire, some stretched in soft sighs of comfort, and others watched the world through curious, unbroken eyes. Shadow lay closest to the hearth, his shoulder freshly bandaged but healing well. The scar would stay, but it suited him, a mark of courage earned, not given. His fur shone in the early light, black and tan like polished oak, and his chest rose with calm, steady breaths. Jack knelt beside him, coffee mug in hand. He had shaved for the first time in days, the gray on his jaw showing clearer now, but his eyes were softer, not the cold, distant eyes of the man who had come home from war years ago. He reached down, rubbing the dog's neck. "You did it, pal. We all made it." Outside, the sound of tires on snow grew louder. 2 trucks stopped in the driveway. From the first stepped Sheriff Nathan Cole, a man in his 50s, tall and broad, with a lined face and calm authority. His uniform was neat, hat tucked under his arm, eyes sharp as polished steel, but carrying the patience of a man who had seen more good than evil in his years and still believed in both. The second vehicle's driver door opened, and reporter Lisa Keene emerged. She was in her mid-30s, slender but tough, with auburn hair tucked under a wool beanie, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She worked for the Denver Chronicle, known for stories that favored truth over comfort. Her brown eyes carried curiosity tempered by empathy, the kind that made people talk instead of shut down. Jack stepped outside, pulling his jacket close. "You're early," he said. The sheriff nodded. "Wouldn't miss this for anything. We've confirmed your report. Those men are in custody. State task force is taking over now." He looked toward the cabin windows, where a dozen pairs of canine eyes peered back. "Hell of a thing you did, Jack. You saved them." Jack shook his head. "We just opened the door. They saved themselves." Lisa smiled, setting up her small camera. "Mind if I record? The world's already calling it The Veteran and the Dog Who Saved Each Other." Jack exhaled, half amused, half uneasy. "I didn't do it for headlines." "I know," she said softly, glancing at Shadow through the window. "That's why people will believe it." Inside, the sheriff and a few volunteers helped load the rescued dogs into transport vans bound for shelters and rehabilitation centers. Some would be trained for service again. Others would simply find homes that loved them. Shadow watched each one leave, tail wagging faintly, as if seeing off brothers from an old unit. Dr. Michael Henson arrived mid-morning, snow dusting his shoulders, medical bag in hand. His gray beard looked whiter against the light, and his eyes carried pride under exhaustion. "All alive," he said. "Every single one. You did good, Jack." "We did good," Jack corrected. "You kept them breathing. I just kicked the door down." Henson smiled. "That's teamwork, the way I remember it." Later that week, Cedar Ridge held a small ceremony in the town square. The blizzard had stripped the trees bare, but ribbons of red and blue fluttered from the lampposts. Locals came in heavy coats, hats pulled low, their breath rising like smoke in the cold air. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, the kind of winter scent that always carried a story. Jack stood near the podium, uncomfortable in the spotlight. Tom Avery and Cal Ramirez flanked him, both dressed in old service jackets. The mayor spoke briefly, handing Jack a certificate of commendation that felt too official for what had really happened. The applause that followed was quiet but sincere, the kind that came from people who understood gratitude didn't need to be loud. When the microphone was passed to him, Jack hesitated, glancing down at Shadow sitting obediently at his side. Snowflakes clung to the dog's whiskers, and his amber eyes caught the morning light. Jack cleared his throat. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice low but steady. "When I found this dog, I thought I was saving him from the cold. But the truth is—" He paused, looking at Shadow. "He saved me from it first." There was a long silence. Then a ripple of applause spread through the crowd, not thunderous but warm, the kind that felt like sunlight breaking through gray. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed with questions, but Jack slipped away quietly. He and Henson walked along the edge of the square where the snow hadn't been cleared, their boots crunching softly. Henson said, "You ever think of what's next?" Jack shrugged. "I'm not going back to war, that's for sure." "Didn't mean that," Henson said with a smile. "I've been talking with a few folks in Denver. There's funding available for service dog therapy programs, pairing veterans with rescue dogs. You and Shadow could help me start it. Call it a second chance for both sides." Jack stopped walking, the idea sinking in like warmth through ice. A program? Yeah, you've already got the best partner you could ask for, Henson said, nodding toward Shadow. And I know a few Marines who could use what you found here. Jack looked toward the horizon, where the mountains caught the sun like shields of gold. Second chances, he murmured. Guess we've both had ours. The following month, the story spread far beyond Cedar Ridge. The footage of the warehouse raid, the photos of the rescued dogs, and the image of Jack kneeling beside Shadow beneath a rising sun became symbols of resilience. Donations flooded in. The Pine Ridge Recovery Project, a joint effort between Jack, Henson, and the state, began training dogs to assist veterans with PTSD, anxiety, and loneliness. One crisp morning weeks later, Jack sat on his porch, watching Shadow nap at his feet. The dog's head rested on his boot, ears twitching in sleep, chasing dreams only he could see. Snow still lined the pines, but the air was gentler now. Jack took a deep breath, the kind that fills not just lungs but the soul. You know, he said quietly, we did all right. Shadow opened one eye, tail tapping the porch wood once. The sun crept higher, spilling light across the hills. In that moment, the silence, the warmth, the simple presence of another living soul, Jack Turner understood something he hadn't in years. Healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from having someone to remember with. And so, under the first true dawn of spring, a man and a dog who had both been lost to war found their way back to life. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from heaven. Sometimes, they come on 4 legs, covered in scars, carrying the silent courage to heal a broken heart. When Jack found Shadow that night, he thought he was saving a lost dog. But maybe it was God sending a reminder that even in the coldest storm, grace still finds us. Faith isn't always about what we see. It's about what we choose to believe, that love can rebuild what pain destroyed, that loyalty can outlive fear, and that a single act of kindness can echo far beyond one life. If you believe that every rescue, every second chance, and every bond between man and animal is a piece of God's work on earth, then share this story. Leave your prayer or your thoughts in the comments below. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe, not just to our channel, but to the message itself. That compassion is still alive, that hope still walks among us, and that sometimes the hands of God have paws. May God bless you, your family, and every soul that still believes in second chances.